Alright, hello and welcome. I'm doing a very short demonstration of the new Madhouse game. This is just what I've put together over the past few weeks. We're not doing a stream today because I just don't really have the time to do all that. So this video is a very impromptu, very brief thing. So I just kind of want to show off what I've put together so far and talk about what's different with this version of Madhouse. So, as you can see, we have Butch, our main character, in the center of the screen, and he's actually over on the right too. The one on the right is actually a little dummy, but the one in the center is one we can control. New to this version of Madhouse is the fact that your character can move in 8 directions. Well, you actually have a full 360-degree range of motion, but it's displayed graphically as 8 directions. So there's south, southwest, west, northwest, north, northeast, and east. And you can walk in those directions, and you can attack in those directions as well. So those are the 8 directions of movement in this new Madhouse. So with the basics, you have a melee attack. So you swing your attack, and you'll have to forgive the whooshing sound effect. All the sound effects that I'm using are from the original version of Madhouse. A lot of these were made back in like 2004 up to 2007. That's the period of time that I worked on the original. So it's going to have a lot of sound effects that are just not very refined, that are just sort of... I probably even made this sound with my mouth back then. So it's got that. And what I want to talk about with this attack thing is that it animates your character. You'll also notice when you're standing still, it kind of pulls you forward, and I think that feels really good. I tried a few different things. One was that it didn't affect movement at all. Another was that when you did a melee attack, it would actually stop you from moving. But I found that it's setting your speed to a very small amount when you attack. So if you're moving, it slows you down just slightly. And if you're not moving, then it pulls you forward with the momentum of your weapon swing. Now, there's one thing I don't really like with this is, in general, it seems like when my speed is at a certain speed, like when he's walking around, he's fine. But if he's going like at a slightly faster speed or slightly slower speed, like with the weapon swing, you might notice that the sprite, and it could be a little hard to see in this recording, but his sprite actually like jitters really violently, and I think that might just have something to do with how things are being scaled. And basically this new version is using surfaces, which is something that the original version, like back then, I didn't even know what surfaces were. So with this version, I'm actually using surfaces to scale the game properly, but also to store information like blood stains. So let's go over and attack this guy with our melee attack, and you'll notice a few things happening. So blood flies out, and it slowly gets darker to sort of, okay, that's wrong right there because it just disappeared. Let me actually restart this because it actually has some problems with the surfaces aren't, when I tab out, they actually get kind of wiped away. So I'm going to just restart this real quick. And hopefully this will... Okay, so we're back. So let's see now. What should happen is that, this is pretty early in development, so there's definitely a few things that need to be worked out. But what should happen is when I strike this character, the blood should fly out, and it should create a blood stain, which gradually dries, and then it becomes baked into the surface for holding information like blood stains. So if this works, then all is well. But if it doesn't, then it might have something to do with the video recording software. And it looks like it worked that time. So now our blood is just baked into that surface. And the good thing about this is that that's no longer taking up any sort of memory. The original game, all these blood stains, it generated about 4 to 8 blood stains right there. And the thing is, with the original game, those blood stains were just kind of treated as objects or instances. They remained in the game, and eventually you would end up with hundreds, if not thousands of them littering the level. And it would needless to say, the game would start to slow down. So the workaround that I had for that in the original game was that if you hit the delete key, it would actually clear all of those blood stains and the game speed would return to normal. Obviously that's not ideal, so that's why surfaces had to be implemented in this new version. So now the blood stains are just they're objects, but as they start to dry out and become that dark red color, they actually get baked into the surface. So now they're completely just a visual thing. So next, a new thing that I wanted to introduce was every character has a melee attack, and some characters have stronger melee attacks and some have weaker melee attacks. But in a game where there's lots of guns and projectile weapons, I still wanted the melee to be somewhat relevant. I like the idea that the melee can be used for more than just attacking. Maybe it could be used for maybe deflecting certain incoming projectiles. One thing, though, that's new to Madhouse, to this version, is that you can charge your melee, and you'll start to flash, and then you can release it to shoot sort of a short-range projectile of your melee attack, which will have the same strength as your actual attack. So in the case of Butch here, his melee attack fires a shockwave out. But this isn't going to be true of all characters. Some characters will have the shockwave effect for their melee. Others will throw sort of like a Zelda-esque boomerang. And when I say Zelda, I'm referring to like the first three, well, the first Zelda and the third Zelda. That kind of boomerang that just flies out and then stops and kind of comes back to you. So some characters will have a shockwave, some characters will have a boomerang effect. And the one that I'm really interested in is basically like a hook shot. And again, I'm referencing Zelda because this game has a lot of similarities to kind of Zelda gameplay, classic Zelda gameplay, I guess. But the hook shot is, for example, there's a character named Ragman, and he fights with a hook. But in this version of the game, when he throws his hook, it's going to have a rope attached to it, and he'll actually be able to pull, if he throws it at a other character, it'll actually pull that character towards him, sort of like Scorpion's attack in Mortal Kombat. But I also like the idea of using this thrown hookshot style weapon as not just something that you pull opponents towards you with, but you can actually use it to grapple onto things and sort of bring yourself across gaps, which is going to really come into play with the whole, I want this version of Madhouse to be more of a sort of an interconnected world that's story driven and has some lots of NPCs to interact with, lots of sub stories going on, and I kind of want this world that's sort of, I guess, I don't want to use the term Metroidvania because it's been done to death, but I do kind of want a more gated gameplay within an open world. So you have this open world that's all interconnected, but then you have you come to this part where there's a gap, and the only way to get across is to get the character that has the ability to throw a grapple and pull you across. So stuff like that I think will be really interesting moving forward. So in general with movement, we have a few new things. We have the strafing ability, which kind of locks your facing position in one direction. So your movement is independent of your facing direction, but you can kind of lock that in just to make your attacks. And that kind of makes more sense when you start using things like Desert Eagle, Action Express, and as you can see, which are also being baked into the background, just like the blood. So that's detail. If it gets too messy or too crazy, who knows, I might not keep it, but I kind of like the way. We also have a chainsaw, which doesn't have any sound effects yet, but it's kind of the that it cuts, and we actually killed him, so he's gone now. R.I.P. So the idea here is that this chainsaw is sort of it's a really short-range melee weapon that has a limited amount of uses. Eventually it runs out, but I don't have that implemented yet. And what this does is it kind of just cuts through your armor. If you have any sort of defense or armor, it does a consistent amount of damage to all characters, and it's just something that's just sort of meant to cut through. Whereas the sort of thing. And then there's going to be shotguns, flamethrowers. There's a lot of new guns that I'm interested. So we have the standard old stuff from the original game, but there's also going to be new weapons that I'm really excited for. Also with the movement, we have this dashing ability, which he kind of does the little sprite jitter, but you can see when he starts dashing, he actually got tired because dashing and rolling and all this stuff are going to be tied to stamina. So you can't see your stamina meter right now, but it's there, and that will be displayed later in some sort of HUD. But right now you just kind of have, the ability to increase your speed for a limited amount of time. But if you do it too much, you get tired, and then you're kind of slowed down. And see, here it's really noticeable. So here's the sprite jittering that I was talking about. I really don't like that. So that's like one of the next things I want to try to figure out what's going on and how to solve that. But yeah, I think having the ability to sprint is pretty important in this game. Just like the ability to charge your melee and throw it kind of enhance the melee aspect of the game. I wanted the sprinting to sort of enhance the movement aspect of the game, because just like melee, how the power of your melee attack is dependent on your character you choose, so is speed. So what I wanted was the ability for slower characters to bridge the gap to faster characters, so they're not constantly being like run down. Characters that are slower will probably get more stamina, so they can actually sprint for a little longer. So it just kind of balances everything out. And this is like some design that like I've worked on in a document about 5 years ago when I was going to try to make an online version of Madhouse that unfortunately didn't quite, become a thing. But I still have all that documentation, and I have a lot of the art that I did. So it's actually making the development of this game a really, really streamlined process. So we've got movement, we've got strafing, we've got dashing, and now I'm going to show you a new one, rolling. And the rolling sprite, it only has 4 directions right now, but this is pretty fun. And it is sort of based on your speed. So if you're just doing it standstill, you're not going to roll very far. But if you're actually moving, you can kind of do a faster roll. And I'm not sure if it's tied to sprinting either. Let's check it out. Yeah, so you can sprint and roll for a much better effect. And this will be tied to stamina too. And I'll probably end up animating 8 directions with this. The thing that's so daunting with this project is that there's all these player characters that you can ultimately play as, and they all have movement, they all have, attacks, they have rolls, they have all sorts of animations, and these are all like hand-drawn pixel art, so they're not overly complex, and that's just for the sake of being able to animate things pretty reasonably. So I think that about covers most of it. Oh yeah, there's one effect I want to show you, is that I want to have different death effects depending on how you're killed. Let's say you're playing the 2-player versus version of the game, and let me just reset it. So we have this other character here. So, another player would be controlling the character that's not moving. I would be controlling the one that's attacking. So you could be running around and fighting each other. That's really kind of the meat of what Madhouse is at its core, and that's kind of what the emphasis of all the previous incarnations of this game have been. Just this 2-player versus local multiplayer game. And so having that, and I want there to be like, let's kill this guy with the chainsaw. If you kill him with the chainsaw, it will actually decapitate him. So if I were to shoot him with the magnum, eventually, he would do a skull, some bones, and some blood, right? But the idea is, and I don't have it implemented yet, but if I actually like the idea of his head rolling off and then him entering this headless state where he can no longer perform any of the actions that he usually does, but now he can still run around just for a little bit without a head. And I'm going to show you how that would look on this character here. So here's what the headless state looks like. And you're just kind of running around with all this blood spurting out until your body explodes. And this time with no skull because your head would have rolled off and been laying over there somewhere. So that's kind of just a fun thing. I just really want to be gratuitous with the amount of blood, uh, because Madhouse has always been a game that's really emphasized the blood and the gore, but in a kind of a fun, lighthearted comic horror way. So that's about it for this. The only other thing is that I have room-to-room transitions set up, so you can kind of transition between this sort of, I don't even know what you'd call this, sort of like a wooded, there's a little graveyard over here, there's a car, it's kind of like somebody, maybe some, people pulled over here to chill out or something, kind of just a little hideaway area, and then there's sort of a city tiles from another game I was messing around with, because I want to have really central to the story mode of this game, I want to have sort of a small town, and I really want to emphasize that kind of small town life with, like a hardware store and just these really interesting NPCs that you frequently encounter, and it's sort of just it's a thing that's familiar to a lot of people, I think. So I think I just want to keep a very familiar element of just very everyday things and sort of twist them with these elements of like horror and silliness that I think are fun. So that's basically all I've got to show right now. I hope you guys enjoyed this demo. I know it's short. I know there's not much to see, but this is only a couple weeks of work, so this is something that I'm interested in watching to come together. There's a lot of work to do on it. I'm probably going to be working on this for a few years, maybe 2 at the very least, but in 2020 there's going to be probably a lot of updates on this, because I really love this kind of stuff. I love working on this, and I'm doing all the art and the coding, so it's nice to just have full ownership of something. And this is just the way I've always worked before I worked in teams and worked on these projects with friends, which is a lot of fun, but this is the most this way gives me really good momentum, because I get to do stuff and implement it in game, and then I kind of get to see the results of it really immediately, and it's all just dependent on how hard I'm working or what I'm doing. It's not there's no external factors, and I think that's really kind of a good thing sometimes, because sometimes working with other people is great, but sometimes it can be a little challenging because you really have to keep up the rhythm with each other, and if somebody loses pace, then things kind of fall apart. And it's just, I've had some experiences with that were a lot of projects that kind of just never saw the light of day because of that. And so this is something that I intend to finish, and I don't really want to involve too many outside forces if possible. I'm going to need somebody to do the music, but that's about it. I'm going to try to do everything else by myself. But yeah, that's Madhouse, and it's the new version, and I'm really excited, and I can't wait to show you guys more. I know it's not much right now, but this is what I was really excited to show off, and I wanted to do it today because it's Halloween, and this is a very Halloween-inspired game. So I hope you guys enjoyed, and please let me know what you think. Thank you.